All right, thank you guys. I appreciate you joining me for this webinar. I'm going to talk about some of the dangers and challenges in a bring your own device policy as they relate to SEC registered firms. So appreciate you joining me today for this. See some familiar faces out there, also some new ones. So for those that don't know me, my name is Brian Hahn. I work with SEC registered firms for the most part in helping them get compliant with their cybersecurity programs. So I always like to be as transparent as I can up front. I don't sell ongoing cyber or IT services, and I definitely don't know of a MDM service that I can recommend. Just want to do this more as a knowledge transfer session and talk about some of the things I'm seeing in terms of mobile device management within my clients, and help share some of the ideas that I share with my clients and thinking about what kind of policies they should have in place. So I know most everyone here is going to be a CCO or assigned by the CCO to be in charge of cybersecurity. So always just kind of like to frame what we're talking about in terms of what your role is. So, as CCO, the things you're really going to be concerned about are making sure that owners and their devices are in compliance with your policies. Ever since COVID, the amount of, bring your own device policies out there have significantly increased with people doing Zooms and working from home and that sort of thing. So, it's, I think, something to think about in what we've allowed kind of post COVID, how are we going to manage that going forward in a compliance manner? So, you're also worried about protecting and capturing corporate data. So there's going to be some compliance rules we talk about where you need to be capturing messaging and that sort of thing. And then, of course, protecting the corporate infrastructure, making sure that infected devices or malicious devices aren't getting into the corporate infrastructure or cloud structure, whatever the case may be. Then, of course, you are going to be dealing with protecting the personal privacy of your employees, your end users, or ultimately the device owners. And then there's the legal compliance guidelines that you have to follow in order to have a bring your own device policy. So to make sure we're all on kind of the same definition, we're going to be pretty broad here in terms of bring your own devices, but we're basically talking about any authorized device that's owned by your employee, whether it's a laptop, tablet, mobile phone, whatever the case may be, that is used to access corporate data or your firm's data, whether that's email, file sharing, client portals, whatever the case may be. And so, there's kind of there's security risk, and I think there's also compliance challenges that come when you have these bring your own device policies in place. So just a quick graphic. I think I stole this from CISA or one of the cybersecurity agencies out there. But ultimately, just to kind of give a quick overview of what this type of environment can look like. I know a lot of firms will do kind of a hybrid type situation where maybe they have smartphones just allowed to access email and calendars and scheduling. And then they'll have a firm issued laptop that's able to get into client portal or data files or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be deployed in real life, and we're going to keep it pretty broad today on our discussion in a way that would cover kind of pretty much any of these deployments that have any source of bring your own device element to it. So I always like to reiterate, I'm not a lawyer, but we definitely, when we're working with these firms and getting them into compliance, we come across a few things that you have to consider. So when I'm talking to my when I'm talking to my clients about compliance, we're generally looking at Advisor Act Rule 204-2, that's the book and records rule, and 206-47, which is the compliance rule. And if you want to dive in, I'm not going to dive into these specifically on this webinar, but if you just Google OC release on electronic messaging, that's a great source to go to see exactly what the SEC expects you to be doing to maintain compliance with these rules. And then, of course, in April, we're going to have 20649 and kind of every iteration of that that's going to hit the books in April 2023 that firms will need to be compliant with. And that's definitely going to address how mobile devices are managed. As we kind of move from, I think if you've seen some of my other webinars, we're going to be moving from a period where the SEC would issue guidance on cybersecurity to where we actually now have a regulation on it. So 20649 will cover that. You're also going to be concerned with the Data Protection Act, which states that employees must take appropriate measures against the unlawful or unnecessary processing of personal data. So this is one that most firms don't tend to think about. If you are maintaining compliance with 204-2 and 20647, you're going to be collecting some personal data, whether that's through capturing of email messages or social media messages. Excuse me, not email. Email and text message is what I was specifically focusing on with mobile. But when you're capturing this type of information and trying to maintain compliant, you are going to accidentally capture personal data from time to time. And then, of course, there's going to be certain employment practice codes out there, which dictate the level of privacy that you must afford your employees in a work environment. And then kind of lastly, for those of you that operate anywhere around the European Union, you're going to have the GDPR to deal with. So these are a lot of the compliance considerations and going, that we kind of have with our clients. We have them look at and say, hey, is this something you're ready to take on? Generally, when it comes down to actual documentation outside of vulnerability scans and compliance audits and that sort of thing, for us, it really comes down to two documents that we recommend. One is the Cybersecurity Policies and Procedures Manual. Now, whether you have this as a standalone policy or kind of wrapped into your overall PMP, that's totally up to you. But this is going to be another 20649 rule where every firm is going to need to have this document. But in that policies and procedures, you'll want to outline how you have implemented your MDM policy. What are your security guidelines? What kind of operations are you following around it? And who's responsible for those policies? So you would outline that type of information in your policies and procedures manual. And your employee technology usage agreement is going to be used to, it's literally what it says. It's a usage agreement with the employees where they are saying, we're not going to connect to public Wi-Fi. We're not going to connect to networks we don't know. We're going to use VPN, whatever your stipulations may be. We always want employees to sign this document at the onset of employment and then reattest to it annually for both of these. So when we start to have these conversations with firms and they say, okay, we realize we need to put an MDM policy in place. How do we go about doing this? And I always joke and say, well, let's start with the paranoid scale. Kind of on the far right, you have a firm that is so paranoid about cybersecurity they're only using typewriters, and on the far left, you have firms that have done nothing to contain the bring your own device policies. There's devices connected they don't know about, they're not monitoring, just pretty lax policy. So my guidance is to say, hey, let's always start on the right and determine, how much do we need to deal it back? We're trying to find that perfect balance between convenience and cost, which bring your own device policies definitely have a lot of convenience and cost to them. And weighing that against security and compliance measures. So, I think firms generally will fall somewhere in the middle where, maybe there's a bring your own device policy. You're using a mobile device management and MDM service to track these devices and, kind of go through your best practices with it, which we'll discuss later. Some of them allow personal usage. I know, like Android and iOS both kind of have enterprise and personal profiles that you can implement, and those are great. And we'll also talk about some of the challenges of that. But this is always, it's starting on this scale and figuring out where you fall. For clients that have wrote their own trading algorithms, proprietary trading algorithms, and they're running their own proprietary servers, and it's extremely sensitive information. Maybe you're going to lean a little more to the right. Whereas if you are just a financial planning firm, you're really only dealing with data. You're not dealing with asset transfers and that sort of thing. Maybe you can be a little more to the left and go with your policies. So it's always just that balance between security and convenience that we're trying to find what's best for a firm. So even, when we start thinking about, kind of that first part is, let's talk the chief compliance officer side of it. Now let's talk, the chief information security officer side of it. And these are some of the cyber threats that we talk about with our clients. We think can go beyond any mobile device management policy. Some of these problems kind of persist no matter what you're doing correctly or incorrectly as a chief compliance officer. Really, one of the biggest problems that we see are man-in-the-middle attacks. That's where a person thinks they are connected to a secure network when they aren't, in fact, and the communication is being compromised by a malicious actor who is using that information to their advantage. So in the real world, where we really see this, and maybe you've seen this in some of our hacking demonstrations that we do, but we'll pull out what's called a Wi-Fi pineapple device. And these are radios that you can buy for under $100 that help mimic a Wi-Fi network and can act as a man-in-the-middle device and collect information that you're sending over. So, this is one of those things we like to point out why it's always important to have a always on VPN policy for, for people, for your workforce, for your employees. These type of attacks are pretty common throughout hotels, coffee shops, and airports. They actually take advantage of the way your devices reach out and look for networks in order to trick them into connecting to what they think is a secure network. So these are the type of policies that we're still kind of worried about, that go beyond what an MDM system can do. One of the other ones I'm always concerned about is rooted in jailbroken phones. So people who've broken through kind of the iOS standards to do their own custom ROMs on there. Same thing with Android, which they call rooted devices. But essentially, these devices bypass a lot of the manufacturers and firms' safeguards that have been built into the hardware from the get-go and into the firmware. So we always want to be able to detect if these devices are on our network and being used by our employees. And oftentimes it'll be said that the back end of these devices is more vulnerable, and that can be the case in some instances. And malware can potentially move from that device into your network, your trusted network. So that's why it's important to make sure that we have a policy that can detect this type of phone on the network. So we're also concerned with data leakage and loss. With employees having information on the devices, of course, we want to make sure that there's no malware or active phishing that's going on that device. Essentially through that level of attack, there's going to be kind of three pivots that they're going to go on. One is they're going to attempt to steal and harvest the data that's stored locally on that device. So that's why it would be important to have employees use some kind of containerized version for their work profile, and hope that doesn't bleed through. They're gonna try to get credentials that have been stored locally to try to pivot into other networks. So that could potentially be things that were saved in password managers, that sort of thing. And then kind of the last attack vectors to destroy data, whether that's through ransomware or just straight destruction. But those are generally kind of the three attack vectors that I tend to see firms deal with. The other one's kind of malicious content in apps. And I had a LinkedIn post the other day where we kind of showed, you can take the TikTok app, and if someone were to browse, if one of your employees were to browse to a firm website or a firm cloud deployment using the TikTok app, that could potentially subject them to key logging. So you lose your credentials. They do screen capturing. And these are the type of attacks that we need to have some kind of policy in place. One, to make sure that apps like TikTok are not being installed on the same devices that have company assets. And two, to make sure that if it is going on, these are concerns that we want to make sure are being caught with the mobile device management system, and making sure that there aren't these kind of problems out there. So, when I tell firms that are looking into implementing this type of system, these are the type of questions to be asking. How is this system going to detect attacks that are coming through? So if even after all that, you think that, the bring your own device is a good idea, which, and I always admit too, when I was in the CCO and COO roles, I definitely allowed a bring your own device policy. And that was just because with the way our firm was set up, it was easy for me to manage, I think it was 8 devices total. So it really wasn't that hard to manage and to get everyone in compliance. Everyone kind of was good friends. We had no problem communicating. So it was easy for us to put a bring your own device policy in place and have it work. If you're a firm, on the other hand, that has constant turnover, a lot of people coming in and out, a lot of devices, small IT to employee ratio. These are kind of things also to consider when putting this type of policy in place. But if you, like I am in the past, and you still are, ready to do the bring your own device policy, there's definitely some guidelines you'll want to follow in the deployment and how you operate with it. One being making sure that you do have the ability to compartmentalize or containerize the operating systems, or a profile within the operating system. In other words, having a work and a personal profile, and allowing you, the firm, to have full control over the apps that are in that work profile. And generally, most of the MDM resources that I've seen, they do have a solution for lost devices and making sure that you can remotely wipe them. So that's always a great one to have. And you want to have the ability to notify employees of application and device updates. And again, that jailbreak detection and presence of banned apps such as TikTok or whatever whatever apps you want to ban, Facebook if you're looking for productivity or data leakage. Having the system that can detect for those apps and report back is pretty critical. You also want one that prompts users to update devices and corporate applications. And I should have added further on here, if they don't have them blacklisted from the network until they go through those necessary updates. You also want to monitor and report on the status of your installed apps, your corporate apps. And this would also kind of tie back into the where you would want to have clear tracking of who your users are, what apps they have access to, or what data they have access to, and what level of data. Are they a typical user? Are they an admin? We want to be able to show clearly how we've mapped that out to the SEC in the event of an audit. And of course, it's just always doing that annual cybersecurity awareness training for your employees. There's a ton of great options out there to do this training for next to nothing. Know4 is a great one. We have a product called Fieldcraft that we offer for free for small firms, so check that out if you haven't done any training. It takes about 10 minutes to set up, but it's super important that you are doing training with your employees so they understand what cyber attacks look like, especially cyber attacks on mobile devices, and you can help be vigilant and protect your firm. One of the big ones, and I think this is really one of those sticky ones for us that we want to make sure we can do, but it's restrict the ability to copy data between the work and the personal environments. I honestly don't know how this plays out in the real world. I've never been behind the deployment of a mobile device management system. Again, I don't have one to sell here. I can't speak to that experience. My job is only in auditing them. But this is a tricky one, even if they do offer this type of protection, because then the question becomes, well, how do exploits like the TikTok app where they're doing screen captures, is the screen captured also in that profile? And maybe someone more expert in mobile security can answer that. But for me, that's one of those questions that I kind of have to look at and say, well, okay, what else could be potentially breaking that barrier and capturing data that I don't want it to capture. Again, talking about that user access mapping, that's an important one to have, and making sure that you only give access to the people that need it. So operations people shouldn't have access to accounting, and accounting shouldn't have operational access to the CRM, so on and so forth. So making sure you compartmentalize individuals and keep them within that group. And then also tracking communications in a compliant fashion. This is a really tricky one. This is, and of course, everything is a policy or a procedure. So I see a lot of firms go through and say, hey, we're going to have a bring your own device policy. But within our procedures, the procedure that every employee is going to sign off on in that employee technology usage agreement is that, hey, if you have a client reach out to you through text message or social media, you need to immediately move the conversation to a media that can be captured, such as email. So it's always trying to find the balance between policy and procedure on there. But that's how I see a lot of firms approach that. Because if you are allowing communications with clients through the text messaging, you are going to be required to capture all those text messages for audit reasons. So that's a big one, and I think for me that's one of the ones that I see a lot of employees have pushback on. And I think it's even a hard conversation for CCOs to say, hey, yeah, we're going to be capturing your text messages on here. So again, those are just kind of some of the things that go through my mind when I think about what do I want in a mobile device management system. I think there's kind of two aspects to what you do if you are going to have this kind of policy. One is get the mobile device management system in place, whether you're using Google's or Microsoft. I think really they all do pretty much the same thing. And then of course you'll have your ability to set it up for compliance and capture what you need using those. And then I also recommend doing, whether you do them kind of internally or externally, but having an audit that you can go through. So this is a kind of quick screen capture of the screen we use, but we essentially break it up into doing mobile device management configuration audits. So that's where we would take a known system like Microsoft or Google and compare it against a known security benchmark to see what may be missing or what we may need to update to get it to a compliant manner. And there's also doing the mobile device scans where we're just going through usually through Microsoft Exchange or some other MDM to scan that device and make sure, again, just looking for the phones that aren't jailbroken, that sort of thing, and making sure that there aren't any vulnerabilities there. So again, kind of two ways to approach that. You want to have your system in place, your MDM system to manage the system and the configurations, and then you're also going to want to have your mobile device scans to manage the individual devices on there. So that's pretty much what I have. When I think about mobile device management, again, it's one of those systems that if you want to put it in place, there is a lot of work necessary to keep it compliant and to make sure that you're protecting corporate data. I know the cost savings can be worth it for a lot of firms. I get it, keeping these devices. I think just as CCOs, you need to be considering, what does the future look like? What is your bring your own device policy going to look like? Knowing that, that's kind of expanding to more and more devices, and your compliance policies and procedures might not always be able to capture all these new devices. So again, just a little quick knowledge transfer session here to tell about, what I think works best for mobile device management if you're going to go that route. Again, it's just figuring out what works well for you on the paranoid scale, and then tagging a solution that fits that. So I hope that's helpful. If any questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. I'm certainly happy to address any concerns you might have about your mobile device management procedures or your policies. or how compliance might interconnect with that. So always happy to have that conversation. Thanks again for attending. I really appreciate you guys coming out and joining virtually to listen to these talks, and I do hope that you find them helpful. Have a great day, and thank you.